Hi, Schnitzel Cups. I got a great interview for you today, a special treat. I sit down with Bjorn and I sit down with Uli Hesse, legendary German soccer writer who wrote the great books Tor, the story of German soccer, as well as many other great books in English and in German. He wrote many articles for ESPN SoccerNet, and he's currently contributing editor to Elf Freunde, a German-based soccer magazine. We talk all things about his history with Beckenbauer and Dortmund and his personal history with the World Cup and the German relationship with the World Cup and the general milieu about how Germans are feeling about this Qatar World Cup. A very insightful interview with it's a lot of fun. I'm very excited we got to present this to you. So sit back, relax, enjoy the interview. Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, the Schnitzel Boys, we have a very, very special guest today. We have Mr. Uli Hesse. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that was right. Very good.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Uli Hesse joins us from, are you in Dortmund right now?
Yes, I'm in Dortmund. Cat sitting in Dortmund.
Oh, cat sitting in Dortmund.
Ah, the glamorous life of a football journalist. Yeah.
Well, for a lot of our listeners, you probably remember Uli Hesse from all his great writing for ESPN SoccerNet. I think I've read so many articles in ESPN SoccerNet. And you yourself, of course, are a very well-versed author with many, many published books, including Tor, The History of German Soccer. And Bjorn and me were talking about how good of a book that was and how much we both loved it. And there was an updated edition this year, if I'm not mistaken, right? At 22, or you said last year, a 2022 edition is out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very snazzy looking new cover.
Yeah.
You also have written several other books.
I'm well prepared.
Oh, there it is. All right.
Wow.
I mean, that really is probably the best book, I would say, in English language about the German history of soccer. It's really well worth reading. I also personally really loved it because we're kind of same generation more or less, so I really connected to the perspective of it, and I just found it so it's just a great read, the way you're capturing really all of the history, all of the the late start of the Bundesliga, all those things that are kind of peculiar about German football are very well described there. So much recommended in that book. We were at Ruhr-Uni Bochum at the same time, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You were much more successful than me. I did not graduate. I spent a lot of time sitting in the cafeteria eating pudding. I very much remember the cafeteria pudding, and then it was a little bit of a dark time for me. I then eventually just moved to New York, and that was that. But you had a better time than I did.
Oh wow, yeah. I kind of quite liked it, actually. I mean, people out there won't know about this, but the university is one of the more ghastly buildings.
Yeah.
Sort of like a brutalist 1960s building. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But still, I liked it.
Yeah. No, I had a good time. I had a good time too with friends and everything, but the academics was just not for me.
Yeah, it was I mean, I had a very, very good professor, an American called David Galloway. He's dead now, but he was really, really good. So we did all kinds of not strange things, but unusual things. I wrote my master thesis about baseball, which he loved, right? Because it was not, what everybody else did, not Hemingway or Shakespeare or whatever. Then we would watch films, lots of films, he was a big John Carpenter fan. So it was an exciting time. Yeah.
I watched Escape from Los Angeles just last night, which is not one of his best movies, but I'm also a huge Carpenter fan. And they just had
I rewatched The Thing the other day. I remember us watching that because, he was a professor for English literature, so it was, so he had a reason for doing that. It was based on a short story, and then there was a 50s film, and then the Carpenter film, and so on.
2011 trash film, so there's 3 films. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah. No, I'm I was watching Big Trouble in Little China the other day. So what
which is very underrated. I like it
underrated.
A lot.
Yeah. And I agree. They had a Q&A with the original cast over the weekend.
Oh, really?
And it's just with James Hong, and it really, really, I'm beating myself over missing it. I really wish I could have gone. Living in Los Angeles, you get all sorts of crazy events like that. Just out of nowhere, some movie you loved from 50 years ago is playing, and the director's there who wants to answer questions afterwards. It's a great place for a movie buff.
Yeah.
Like that. What was
great.
your thesis? You said about baseball. What was the thesis? What was the thesis specifically? Do you remember?
It was called Baseball and American Myths. It was about why baseball is so hugely popular in America. Not just popular, but I mean, people say more books were written about baseball than about all other sports taken together, which is only true if you exclude chess. But if you do, it's true.
So team sports,
yeah. So there was one question. I mean, why is it what it is about baseball?
Americans love it. Is there baseball at all in Germany? No, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's not big, but I mean, it's on the decline, right? In America, I think it's one of those games.
But I do believe there is a resurgence coming because I have noticed because, like you said, there was a period, speaking of movies, in the 90s where every 3 months a new baseball movie. Field of Dreams.
The Kevin Costner films,
Kevin Costner film. And then, of course, as a kid, Angels in the Outfield and stuff. And then there was a big movie a few years ago called Moneyball. I don't know if you remember Moneyball.
Yeah.
And the guy, Billy Bean, who then, of course, is now really into football. He's like a huge soccer analyst. I think he works for the Roma group now or something. So he's taking all his numbers and bringing it to football. And football is very much on the rise here in the United States. While baseball's in decline. But anywho, you've written many books, as well as a history of Borussia Dortmund, your Lieblingsclub, right? And a history, of course, of Bayern München, among many others. And you said you have a new book coming out this year about the Kaiser, right?
Next year in May,
next year about the Kaiser. Did you
we're talking about English books now, right? Books written in English, and I've also done a couple of German books. But anyway, it was I mean, if you're in Los Angeles, I mean, it's probably the same in Brooklyn, but you will understand me when I say I have an agent.
Right.
It's kind of strange in Germany for a writer to say. It's perfectly normal in Britain, but so I have an agent, and he suggested that. So actually, it wasn't my original idea. He suggested that because he said, bizarrely, there are biographies of all kinds of great players, especially in England. The English are obsessed with the game. But Beckenbauer is certainly one of probably among the 10 greatest players who ever lived. And there's no book in English about Beckenbauer. There's plenty of them in German.
Right.
Most of them bearing his name, which isn't the same as, him having written them.
Right.
Well, I'm appreciative. I definitely look forward to reading it. And he's a peculiar character these days with his relationship with FIFA and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. That was sort of I mean, even if you have an agent suggesting a topic, you still have to pitch it, and then have to write an expose and get a publisher interested. And my approach was that he has led 3 lives. I mean, one life actually, that was probably even before I really became aware of the game and himself, because most of us remember Beckenbauer as this amazing player and a fantastic coach who won everything and was beloved by everybody. But sort of there was all this basically happened after he went to America. Before that, there was, yes, he was well respected by the writers and of course by his peers, but he was not the most popular player in Germany. Let's put it this way. Mainly because, well, one reason was he played for Bayern Munich. Another reason was he just had this, he was very un-German. Let's put it like that,
That's probably why he liked New York City so much. That's probably why he liked leaving to go to New York City.
Maybe a bit aloof or arrogant or whatever. So he wasn't universally loved in Germany. He respected, yes, but not loved. Then he also had money problems, tax problems, as many Bayern Munich people tend to have.
Yeah.
So then he went to the Cosmos and basically reinvented himself and came back as a different person. He himself, repeatedly said that he sort of grew up in New York and became a different person. And then he came back as sort of an gradually he became this elder statesman, and it was everybody just loved him. And now, as you say, we've got the World Cup coming up, and he was one of the people on the executive committee who voted on these World Cups. These two controversial World Cups. Yeah, and there was also the scandal surrounding the German World Cup in 2006.
Right.
So he's now suddenly become this, and he's also for a very long time in his life, he seemed to be kissed by the gods. Whatever he did, tend to turn out right, and he was hardly ever injured. And suddenly all these things happened to him. His son died. He's had various health problems, and so it's sort of that makes the life interesting. You start here and then you go there and they go down again, and Anyway,
well, it's fascinating stuff. I look forward to reading it when it comes out. And
I very clearly remember, as a kid when he was going to the Cosmos, and they would, show clips of him playing on like turf with football lines, I don't know how old I was, like 10, looked at it, and he may as well have been playing on Mars. It was completely, what is he, what is this? Where is he going? Yeah, it's interesting. But then he still sort of is nostalgic for that time, right? Like any German player who asks him about going to the US, he'll always be like, oh yeah, it's great. I think he had a great time probably in Studio 54, and New York was a fun place back then. Yeah. Not that.
I mean, that's one of the, I talked to his girlfriend who was with him in New York, because it was also, he basically arrived in, he came to New York in 1977. You had the heat wave, you had a blackout, you had the Son of Sam. You had, as you said, you had Studio 54, you had the punk explosion down, well, it wasn't a big explosion in New York, but you had the scene, CBGBs and Mexicans. So he landed right in there, and it must have been an amazing time.
Kissinger. You probably became good friends with Henry Kissinger, because Kissinger was very involved with Cosmos at the time.
Kissinger used to barge into the dressing room, even if people were half naked or lying in the bathroom and in the bathtub. He was a bit of a fanboy.
He had the world's greatest secrets in his head. He doesn't care. It's just like, hey, how do we play against the Tampa Bay Rowdies over the weekend? Just to me, I find that to be kind of funny a little bit. Now, I'm nostalgic for the 70s. I would love to have been there around that time. When Carlos Alberto arrived in New York, he arrived on the day of the blackout.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, exactly.
Same season. Yeah. Very cool. Well, let's talk a little.
And Carlos, I mean, what we're talking about, we're just chit-chatting anyway. So
sure.
The interesting thing is that Beckenbauer, the greatest sweeper who ever lived. Well, Baresi wasn't too shabby either. Anyway, but he didn't
top
play.
Three for sure. Yeah.
He didn't play as a sweeper for the Cosmos because Carlos Alberto played libero. So he played in midfield.
Back then, they were just lucky to have people who knew how to play the game, because the Americans they had on the team, who still get interviewed all the time, like my analyst from my club, I'm a New York Red Bulls fan, and my analyst is Shep Messing, who was one of the goalkeepers for the Cosmos. They were just there, like he was a high school history teacher, and they offered him $2,000 to be on the team. And if he's like, what happens if I say no? And they're like, well, then we'll find someone else. We don't care. It's like, we just need locals to fill in the spots. There was a guy named Bobby Smith who was just violent. He didn't really know how to play the game, but he was the center back because he could physically attack people. And the league was thinking of instituting a rule. This is the old NASL, where they put a 35-yard line, and past that line, you weren't allowed to foul any of the players or something or like there were no fouls or something like that. They were just trying to.
It was an offside line. There was an.
Was it an offside line? Yeah. But it's just so funny to look back on that. It was just like they brought in a bunch of foreign talent that knew the game and mixed it with a bunch of domestic talent that didn't know, that were just there to this brand new game for them, for themselves. Very exciting. Yeah. No, I could talk about all sorts of things with you. But I think because we got the dawn of the World Cup coming, let's talk some Mannschaft. Is that okay? And then you want to talk about Qatar for a bit? I'd love to touch on that. And I'd love to touch on anything you want to share with us. Any other thoughts you have? Maybe we can also talk about Borussia Dortmund a little bit this year. Do you go to the Dortmund games regularly, or how does that work?
I have
Dauerkarte?
I have a season ticket. Yeah, I've had it since '82, I think. And yeah, since '82. Well, a couple of years ago, I moved to Berlin for because the magazine I work for is based there. So there was a period when I didn't see too many games. Too many Dortmund games. But now, I've been working from home for the last 2.5 years.
Sure.
So we sort of decided to just go back, because as Berlin is a fantastic city if you're young,
right?
Which I'm not anymore. And we sort of missed family and and indeed the football. I mean, when I went to Berlin, a lot of people said Berlin is not a football city, which is silly because it's fantastic. I mean, that was before
Union.
Yeah, exactly. Union became such a tremendous club. But even there's this idea that there's so many people who are not from Berlin living in Berlin, that it's not really a football city. It's also that very much in contrast to Dortmund. I mean, Hertha Berlin can be having a home game and you wouldn't realize it.
Right.
But that's because the place is so big. I had a very small flat in Neukölln. And I remember the first day, it was a Saturday, the first day I was there, I was watching Hertha play. And they were playing in a snowstorm. And I looked outside and the sun was shining brightly. They were just... It was still the same city, but they were very far away. So,
was the sun shining on the Alte Forsterei? Is that where the sun was shining? Or on the Köpenick? Was that where the sun was shining? Where Union Berlin played?
As I said, I was in Neukölln, but at that time, yeah. I mean, right now the sun is shining all the time, right on Köpenick.
Right.
So I'm saying, Union Berlin were about to show up. They're about to become. But Berlin has like 7 professional clubs, right? There's Tennis Borussia Berlin, and then there's I think a handful of just professional clubs in Berlin.
Yeah, they've got lots of clubs. And of course, they've got a tremendous history, which is just amazing.
Yeah.
I remember that when Union were promoted and head of the first Bundesliga derby in years and years and years, there was an American film team. They came to our offices, to the magazine to talk to us about Berlin. And they, they kept asking me, please explain again, where was the wall? Who was on which side? And sort of
wow.
They kept getting mixing up who were the communists, who were the good guys.
Well, it's nice they were trying. It's nice they were trying a little bit. Well, that's so cool.
But it is confusing. It's just a fantastic history. Plus, I was going to say that there's so many people who come from Berlin, from other places. They all bring their teams with them. So you will have bars who only show Hamburg games or Freiburg games or whatever. And whenever there's a Bundesliga match day, you will see lots of people wearing scarves and shirts going to a pub or whatever to watch their team.
I mean, New York is like that. During the World Cup, it's the same kind of thing. You have every team has its own bar, and depending on where you go, no, that's cool. But now you're back in Dortmund. So what's your take on Borussia? Borussia, I would say, I'm a VfL person, Bochum, for better or worse. But I feel like Borussia is sort of frustrating to watch, right? In its own way.
For a number of years now, it's not so much. People assume that Dortmund fans are sort of habitually frustrated because we're not winning the league, but that's not really the point. It's rather that there's an awful amount of talent on the pitch and money poured into that team, and it isn't always, I mean, just a couple of games ago, just a couple of days ago, we lost this Wolfsburg game, and that's just there's just no consistency, and that's been that case for years actually. So that's the most frustrating part. On the other hand, I mean, I'm not just a Dortmund fan, I'm a football fan. I'm a football writer. I'm a professional person, and just between you and me, right? Whisper it, but in a perverse way, I kind of like it because I think that it's a lot more exciting to watch Dortmund play because you really have no idea if they're going to show up, you know, what's going to happen. You know, that's in a way I like it. You know, it makes life as a fan more interesting, I assume, than, I don't know, being a Bayern fan.
That's great that you have that attitude. I feel that way as a neutral. I like watching them too, but I imagine if I was a fan, just defensively, I think that just nothing really frustrates me more as a fan than like just giving up. And I mean, Bochum obviously is like that times 10 this season, you know, the just sort of just giving up just cheap goals. That's just frustrating from a fan perspective. But yeah, you're right. It does make it more exciting.
From an outsider perspective, for me, you know, there's a lot of rhetoric in English media about Deutsches Fußball. Is it kaput? Is it broken? You know, because Bayern München have won 10 years in a row, and they're now 4 points clear on top of the table. They're going to win 11th season in a row. And I look at that, and I'm like, come on, Borussia Dortmund, mach hin, let's go. Like, Dortmund, that's on you to change that. Yeah. Like, as an outsider. Maybe that's unfair of me, because we've got RB Leipzig now over Leipzig. They're now also supposed to carry the torch. They're all supposed to challenge for the title. But I look at a club like Borussia Dortmund, and I see you guys sell Haaland. I don't know. Maybe I'm like, I know you're supposed to sell Haaland. You can't not sell Haaland. But I look at you, you're new kids. And just for whatever reason, I would love for the club to engineer themselves for better success against someone like Bayern München. But I don't know, as someone from the ground, do you guys see yourself as the challengers to Bayern München? Or do you just not care what's going on over there? You really just want to do your own thing?
It's really, this is really difficult to say because, first of all, for people of my generation, you know, I didn't grow up regarding Bayern Munich as our rivals.
Right.
No way. I mean, for me, it's still
Schalke.
the Schalke and the Bochum games. When I grew up, Bochum were really, really good, and at least, well, absolutely on a level with Dortmund. You know, I saw my first game a couple of months after we were promoted back to the Bundesliga, and then all through the 80s, we were usually fighting relegation. So sort of that's sort of my background. I just can't really get this out of my system, you know. I just don't regard myself. I don't see Bayern Munich as Dortmund. But then again, it's totally different for my son, for instance, who was born in 1990. You know, he was born with, you know, Dortmund being a big club, winning silverware. Of course, it's different for him. Before the season, I talked to Derek Ray, who covers the Bundesliga for ESPN, and we were talking about that, exactly about that. You know, the way the Bundesliga is perceived is strangely the right word. I don't know. Anyway, it all comes down to the question of, you know, who will win the league. But for 90% of football fans, that's not really the most important thing. I mean, you know. I assume that for Björn, you know, he's kind of sort of interested in, you know, who's winning the league and but it's not really, but it's got nothing to do with his team, you know.
He just wants to stay in the league, right?
Yeah. And that's the case for most fans. I mean, even before this Bayern monopoly began, it was like that, you know. The only difference was that in the old days, Bayern used to have off years. And they stopped having these, and that's kind of annoying. Well,
they just became too good. Yeah,
it seemed like this year was possibly an off year, but it still looks like they're going to be good enough to.
Yeah, it's you know, in the new edition of Tour, I also try to explain that there is still a big gap between the two clubs, Dortmund and Bayern, financially. Yeah. So, which is one of the reasons, you know, Dortmund are getting all these young players and then have to sell them at a profit, because that's sort of the only business model you can have, because the other business model is taken up by Bayern.
Right.
And I also say that you also have to say that, yes, the last 10 years have been pretty, frustrating in terms of the title races, but they would have looked very different, I assume, those past 10 years, if one single transfer had not happened. And that was Lewandowski to Bayern.
Sure.
Right.
So I think that's why a lot of people went into this season thinking, well, without Lewandowski, let's see who's going to score the goals. Now Choupo-Moting is scoring them.
Right. And Sadio Mane too.
These guys are crazy.
Yeah.
Nobody put, yeah, very, very surprising. And Mane's hurt, but still now Choupo-Moting is stepping in. Yeah.
How long do you think?
What you're saying? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, how long do you think Moukoko is going to last in a Bayern shirt? Excuse me, in a Dortmund shirt in yellow. How long do you think Moukoko is going to be wearing yellow?
You mean in a Dortmund shirt before he's wearing the Bayern shirt?
yeah, or a Chelsea shirt. I don't know, or Arsenal shirts. You never know. The English are coming up by and everything. Yeah,
I mean, it's having said, I mean, it's not like he's a Dortmund lad. Who came through. I mean, we got him from St. Pauli. So when Dortmund lured him away, he was already touted as a big talent. So I assume that that's how modern football works. It's only fair if one day. I mean, if he keeps up his development, that one day he'll go to a bigger club.
Yeah.
When that day comes, I don't know. I mean, he's now called up to the. I mean, we can talk about the World Cup now because
let's go for it. Yeah,
he was. Called
he's
up
going. He's going. Yeah.
Adeyemi is going. There's a big Dortmund contingent on this roster, which had a couple surprises, right? Or am I wrong? Mario Götze,
Niklas Füllkrug, and Yusuf Moukoko, who's I mean, both of them probably wouldn't have been. I assume they wouldn't have made the cut if Timo Werner, Timo Werner was available and. Probably even
which, by the way, I'm responsible for. Unfortunately, I cursed Timo by declaring that he was back in form, and that meant great things for our team at the World Cup. So sorry, it's my.
Here on the podcast, we have something called the Schnitzel Boys Curse. Whenever we proclaim something grandiose, the opposite happens almost immediately.
Yeah, we have that. We have sort of the magazine I work for is called Elf Freunde.
I forgot to say that in your intro. You work for Elf Freunde now these days.
I keep saying that with an English accent, an American accent.
Elf Freunde.
Elf Freunde. Yeah. Elf on the Shelf Freunde. Yeah.
And they say we have a curse. We have sort of like the Sports Illustrated cover curse.
Right.
Which is statistically probably not correct. But it's people only remember the perks or the downs or whatever we call it. So we actually
have our fun.
We had Florian Wirtz on the cover in a big interview with him while the magazine was coming out.
Now where's he at?
That did not work.
And of course you will then get tons of emails. most of those emails right now are saying stay away from Freiburg.
Right.
Don't say anything about Freiburg.
No comment.
Please don't put any Freiburg play on the cover.
So the one Bochum, the one little
one more thing.
Yeah,
I once replied to one of those emails explaining this. There is an explanation behind the Sports Illustrated thing, which sort of goes this way: people only make the cover of a big magazine if they've done something unusual. If they've been better than they normally are,
Right.
So, and that means you'll soon revert back to normal.
Regress to the mean, yeah.
Like if you're, we talked about baseball. I don't know if you're, a 250 hitter and you're suddenly hitting 300 or whatever. Right. It only means you're going to hit 220, whatever. So that sort of thing.
It's going to even out. Well,
this curse thing. And even this, outlier thing, strangely never applies to Bayern Munich. We've had tons of Bayern players on the cover, and they're never injured. They never have a loss in form.
Mm-hmm.
They win the league year in, year out. So
you got to try harder. More cursing.
We got to curse more.
More covers. Bigger proclamations. You got to keep going. Yeah. Oh, I hear you. Well,
talking about the roster, the one little. I mean, can't even call it that. The one little Bochum victory over Dortmund is Bella Koch over Mats Hummels, who of course no longer plays for Bochum. But what do you think about that? Hansi Flick said youth over experience.
Yeah, but I think he was talking about the back line, right? The defenders. I think basically what hurt Hummels was that he's only a centre back. I think. Well, Germany obviously has problems in the fullback positions.
Yeah.
So I think Flick was looking for people who could theoretically play fullback. I mean, Niklas Süle is not playing fullback for Dortmund.
Right.
As far as I know, Schlotterbeck has never done it, but to me, he looks like a fullback.
He does, yeah.
A little bit. So he's got a lot of people in there who could theoretically, if need be, play fullback. I mean, that's also why he, Klosterman is in there, even though he hasn't played at all, which is a big risk.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was that, plus of course the fact that I understand. I probably understand the national manager's reasoning, because it is a little bit difficult to take a guy like Mats Hummels to the World Cup and then not play him.
Right.
I mean, I don't even think that he's the kind of guy who would, cause unrest or whatever, but it would forever be a subject,
Mm-hmm.
during the entire World Cup.
Yeah.
And I think he was just trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
Because as you say, he mentioned youth a couple of times, He also mentioned versatility, that he had people who can play many positions. And he also mentioned that when he was asked about Füllkrug, one of the things he said was that, you can take Niklas to a World Cup and he'll never cause any trouble, even if he's not playing.
Right.
So
he's just happy to be there. I mean, he didn't know. He had no idea that this could be a possibility, but he was on form, and and you needed a forward. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably, I think he's probably in over his head at a World Cup. So honestly, I don't think that's his level, But I think that maybe if I had been the national manager, I would have taken him along as well, because it's a bit like a Kevin Grosskreutz character. Who famously is a World Cup winner in 2014.
Amazing.
And but that's always been the case. I mean, you can go back all the way to 1954. A lot of people think that remember Helmut Rahn for the goal that won the World Cup.
Right.
But he didn't go there as a first choice player. Hans Schärfer and Bernie Claude were supposed to play on the wings.
Right.
But Helmut Rahn was just this, bubbling, outgoing personality, and you need a guy like that, He was always roomed with Fritz Walter, who was a bit of a moody character who tended to have self-doubts, So you need a guy like Rahn or Grosskreutz, and I think Füllkrug is a little bit like that. I'm not saying he's like Helmut Rahn, but
Helmut Rahn was a one-hit wonder. In the '58 World Cup, he was on the squad. I don't think it was not as fortuitous as I think we remember from '54.
Yeah, I think he was put into the side in 1954 for the first Hungary game,
right,
where the national manager knew that we're probably not going to win this game, and he was trying a few things out. And Helmut Rahn was one of the few bright spots. Scored a goal and it looked okay. So I think that just, as happens in tournaments, suddenly you put a guy in and and things work out, and you suddenly
we were talking about that recently, that only two players in German history have ever made their national team debut during a World Cup, and one is Heinz Kwiatkowski, the goalie from that game, who that was his first game. The other one is Harald Konopka in 1978. He made his national team debut as a sub in the World Cup. Other than that, no one has ever made their national team debut during a World Cup. Lothar Matthäus made his debut during the Euro, but not the World Cup. So but these guys are gonna get time, right? Mukoko and Füllkrug, they're gonna
Do you remember the Matthäus game? They were playing Holland, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And I think I don't know if the story is true, but I once spoke to Bernhard Dietz, who was the captain of that West German team.
Duisburg,
and he said that he noticed that Matthäus was warming up and not getting into the game. And then, Dietz says that he felt like, come on, we're 3-0 up. Give the guy a game. And then he said he sort of suddenly had an injury, a very slight injury, Dietz. So he motioned towards the bench to, please take me off. And then he was taken off, and Matthäus came on for him.
Matthäus came on.
And then was 3-1. Then Matthäus gave away a penalty. It was 3-2. And he said he died 1,000 deaths on that substitutes bench. Thinking, now we're going to blow this just because I wanted Matthäus to get his first international. But they hung on and they won the game 3-2.
Oh,
and then he got more internationals than anybody else. He just clung under that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's
most capped player. Also, I read today if Moukoko gets some time, he'll be the first 18-year-old ever to play for Germany in a World Cup.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Is he 17?
I mean,
or is he 18?
He'll be 18 soon.
I think he's going to turn 18 like right before. Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's a game against Oman real quick before the World Cup. So there's a good chance that Füllkrug and Moukoko will not get their debut in the World Cup. So that stat will stay the same.
Oh, interesting.
Because unless one of them doesn't get minutes against Oman, who knows? So that stat might have to unfortunately stay the same.
Okay.
So you said, when we shared correspondence earlier, you said that you're very critical of sort of the national team, right?
Well, yeah, we had a well, I keep saying well. I'm trying to
sorry to put you on the spot, but as a good journalist,
no, you're not
challenge
putting.
convention.
I'm just trying to explain it. The answer is because the answer is quite complex.
Right.
I mean, first there's myself, then there's the magazine, then there's the general mood in Germany. So of course, well, first maybe talk about the magazine. We actually had a long meeting about this, saying, are we going to put out a World Cup issue? How are we going to treat the World Cup? Are we going to cover it? Are we not going to cover it? Because there was actually the option to actually boycott it, even though we're a football magazine, for which a World Cup is normally, the biggest thing. But the mood in Germany is not very good, at least amongst very committed fans. And we get tons of mails from people saying we should boycott it. And so it is unfortunate. Let's put it this way. It's because it should be such an enjoyable event, such a huge event. And for a lot of people, it's kind of ruined even before it's begun.
Right.
So, so that makes it very difficult. So what we did then was we put out a World Cup issue.
It's the dark side of the moon.
Dark side of the football.
Can you read it to Wizard of Oz? Does it match up with Wizard of Oz?
Oh, if you played backwards, yeah. Anyway,
do you know that legend of the dark side of the moon from Pink Floyd matched up perfectly with Wizard of Oz? If you watch it,
no, I didn't.
You never heard that? It's like an old stoner myth. If you play the like Wizard of Oz,
it's like playing Beatles records backwards or
something like that. Yeah,
along those lines. Yeah.
Committed fans will come up with 20 moments where they just line up perfectly. Like there's a certain moment in the song where a carriage has to come by, and in the movie Wizard of Oz, it's when the carriage comes by and so forth. So if you ever have 2 hours and you don't know what to do, play Wizard of Oz and then play Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon and see what they're talking about.
This is our alternate programming. If you're boycotting the World Cup and you have time on your hands.
You know what? Another unusual thing about this World Cup, which we only realized a couple of weeks ago, is that normally when there's a World Cup on, there's only the World Cup,
Right.
But now there's tons of football during the World Cup. I mean, the lower leagues are all playing.
Yeah.
The countries are playing that are not participating in the World Cup. So it's not like it's because it's in our winter now instead of the summer. There's plenty of football. I mean, there's
next week I'm going to a Haas foul game because they're coming to Los Angeles. So next week I'm actually going to watch Haas.
Plus that, of course. I mean,
friendlies. Yeah. Well, for us, it's different because usually Major League Soccer plays through historically has played through the World Cup. So this is different for us. That was always super weird for me, you know, it's like, oh, at the conclusion of Poland and Ecuador, stay tuned for the Seattle Sounders against Real. Like, but
it was hard to focus. I just, whenever MLS was going on, I just ignored it. I love MLS, but the World Cup's 3 games a day. I can't handle more than that. Yeah.
Well, for us, it's here in the US, it's a different, you know, it's also like you're saying, unfortunate is the right word. For us here, traditionally, boycotting the World Cup is the default setting. You know, like when I came to this country, it was barely on TV, and now there is a lot of excitement. The team didn't qualify last time; they're back now, and next time it's going to be here. So it's an odd mix, you know, because you want to be really excited, and it's a big deal. That US against England game, I think it's going to really be it's going to be a big event here. And but yeah, at the same time, you have, I mean, really, it's just from the beginning, it was just a disaster of corruption, and anything you've heard since then has not, it does not make one feel better about it.
And there's also weird reports coming out. There's just new stuff coming out. I don't know if they did the same in Germany, but here in the US, Qatari officials offered fans to go to the tournament to spy on other fans and to tweet out positive things. In addition to that, the Qatari, you know, with Leon Goretzka speaking out against what the Qatari officials said about how being LGBTQ is damage to the mind. You know, it just gets weirder and weirder and weirder almost as things move forward.
I mean, they had the handball World Cup a couple of years ago, and they I mean, Qatar, you know, and they hired Spanish handball fans to root for Qatar during the handball World Cup. They actually flew them over to Qatar, and
here in the United States, Qatar competed in our Gold Cup, in our regional tournament, and they hired American fans to be their fans. So there's photos of a bunch of blonde-haired, blue-eyed, you know, Americans with the Qatari flag going like, "Woo, go Qatar!" It's very much reminiscent of what North Korea did in 2010, I believe it was. Or was it 2014?
You know, it's a very difficult subject. I mean, there's a famous German football writer called Ronald Reng who's done a couple of really, really good books, and he's done a very smart piece about how this whole debate about Qatar is mainly a European thing, and why it is mainly a European thing. And there's all kinds of, for instance, for us, it's just you know, to play a World Cup in the winter is very, very strange. Although, of course, for half of the world, it's always been played during the winter.
Right. Brazil was in winter, and South Africa was in winter, right?
Yeah, I just did it for the new edition of El Freunde. We have very little things, football secrets. I did a very short piece about the time when it snowed during the World Cup, which was during the first ever World Cup in Uruguay on the very first day. Because it was technically winter in Uruguay. It does snow very rarely in Uruguay, but it happened during the opening day of the World Cup. So that's one thing. Another thing is, yes, all the things that you mentioned about corruption and everything. And Ronald Reng sort of kind of cleverly argues that for the vast majority of people around the world, corruption is a very normal thing. It's a factor of everyday life. So it's kind of, for them, it's hard to get fired up all about that, you know.
Right.
But for me, the problem is that for the first time ever, there's a World Cup in a country that has no football culture and football tradition to speak of. I don't know if any of you has ever been to the region there.
No,
So
no.
I was in Dubai in 2016 for a 4-4-2 piece because Borussia Dortmund had their winter training camp in Dubai, which is not Qatar, but it's not vastly different.
Right.
And so the training camp was slightly outside the city. And one day I missed the shuttle bus for the journalists. So I took a taxi cab, and you were actually driving through a desert, going to a high-tech, very expensive a training center. And he was trying to make a conversation. He wanted, he was asking me where I was going. And I said, well, Borussia Dortmund are, holding their winter training camp here in Dubai. And he had this blank look on his face, that, and I realized he had no idea who Borussia Dortmund are.
Right.
So I said, yeah, well, it's a football club from Germany. You probably know Bayern Munich. And he still had this blank look. And I said, well, do you know any football clubs like Real Madrid, Barcelona? And he said, football is that played at the Olympics? And I said, yes, it's kind of played at the Olympics. So what's your sport? And he said, racing. And I said, what racing? Motor racing. And he said, no, camel racing.
Camel racing.
Yeah, camel racing. And they actually, we passed a huge stadium for camel racing.
Oh.
So there's nothing wrong with camel racing, of course.
Right.
What we're saying is they just don't have this, they don't have a tradition for not just football, for just basically our
right. They live in the desert,
sports,
so
like
they play desert sports.
Yeah. I mean, and of course nobody's going for a run outside, like I don't know, playing tennis outside, or because it's just too hot. You don't do this. So of course they have this totally different attitude towards towards what we consider normal sports.
Yeah.
And that's very strange. That's
exactly.
very strange. But during this meeting, during this meeting, one of my colleagues, he said that he really was totally against this World Cup, and that he would probably boycott it as a fan, but that as a journalist, he felt like it was his duty to report on it. Okay. And then it was my turn, and I said, well, for me, it's exactly the other way around, because as a journalist, I could quite imagine, just ignore the tournament and doing, something else. But as a fan, I'm kind of, first of all, I know myself. Of course, I'll be watching every game. Right. I mean, it was silly to, pretend otherwise. And it's also that I'm really interested now. I mean, really, well, intrigued may be the wrong word, but I'm really curious to see what kind of World Cup it's going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, you asked me about, you asked about the Germany squad. I mean, the squad was nominated today, but there's still a match day. There's still one match day to be played. So, people could pick up injuries, everything. Right. And then after that, the team, they have, how long? I don't know, 10 days or whatever to get together. And, that's just not the way we normally prepare for a World Cup.
It's going to be very, I agree. Yeah, it's going to be very different. And the injury thing, because of this quick turnaround, there's just no chance for anyone to recover because of that short time period. It's going to be interesting. I mean, I agree. I'm in exactly the same boat. Some part of me feels like I should boycott it, but I also, it's also so interesting, and there's no, there's just no chance of that, really.
Same here. My heart knows it's bad. Like, I shouldn't be watching this, because the big sort of elephant in the room, obviously, it was built on the back of these slave workers, the kafala system, right? Of the many, many things with Qatar, to me, that boils down to number one. And you sit there and think, should we, the developed world, be supporting this nonsense and be open to this, the fact that we're this, what is it, high-class citizens watching this tournament on the back of citizens from developing countries, and it just gives you a bad taste in your mouth. But I love the World Cup so much, so I can't skip. I gotta watch it. I have to watch everyone. The only cup, and for an American too, ich bin Deutsch, ich bin auch an American as well. It's been 8.5 years for us. We weren't in the 2018 World Cup. Russia, which has its own thing, so I just can't miss that. I have to go watch. I have to watch what's going on. I have to see what's going on. The whole boycott concept, I understand it, but it's just too late. They should have done this boycotting stuff 2 years ago. The DFB also, and the English FA and the Spanish FA, they should have gotten together and should have made a stand to be like, we're not going to compete for this tournament. That should have happened 2 years ago. Now it's too late. At least that's my opinion. I mean,
it's also it may be, and maybe that I'm coming slowly beginning to talk about my problems with the World Cup is. It may be whataboutism, but my first really big World Cup for me was 1978 in Argentina.
Oh yeah, they had also
the second
Peru game,
the second most controversial World Cup, right? Probably
Argentina-Peru game,
and then probably that was probably, I mean, looking back at it, a lot worse. than Qatar. I mean, yeah, because people were being tortured and kidnapped and killed while the World Cup was going on. So, yeah, that was. But of course, I didn't know that as a kid. I loved it as a kid. Yeah.
Well,
so it is unfortunate, actually. But sorry, because the other thing about World Cup is always that I have always mixed feelings about World Cups. And I've always mixed feelings about the national team, that's just my thing, you know. That's got to do with me. I was such a big football fan in 1978, and then the World Cup 4 years later in Spain that ruined a lot of things for me.
The Battle of Gijón.
Austria,
Right?
That 80s. I mean, I'm because we're same generation. I'm with you there. That 80s team was, I mean, both 82 and 86 was not a lovable team.
No, it was but like everybody else, I was really, I mean, back then we were all looking forward to World Cups because it was, we could be watching 3 games a day,
right.
Because this was unheard of course, back then. Even in Europe, there was not very much live football on television. So we were all really, really looking forward to the 82 World Cup. Also because, in contrast to 78, the kickoff times were better for us. It was easier to watch the games and everything. Right. And then the German team just behaved dreadfully. You know, it started with losing to Algeria. Then there was the shame of Gijón, you know, the game against Austria. There was the Battiston incident. And the players behaved dreadfully towards the fans. At the same time, the best team I had ever seen play football until that time, Brazil, were competing at this World Cup. Right. So everybody felt, okay, now we're going to support Brazil, you know, and they get knocked out by Italy.
Right. They're the greatest team to never win a World Cup, I believe.
Yeah, and the guy scoring all the goals who had been, you know, banned for match fixing. It was just dreadful. I hate you. Ever since, I have problems with World Cups and the German. I mean, it's gotten better. I've gotten over it very slowly. I mean, I think it helped that you know, later on the team became more diverse, you know, and also, well, from a professional standpoint, I mean, in 2006 there were players on the pitch who I knew personally, so it was kind of hard for me to, you know, to not root for them and not wish them all the best. So it's not as bad as it used to be, but ever since 1982 I've never really recaptured that feeling of, you know, unreservedly supporting the national team. So
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I do feel like I definitely came around eventually, because the attitude, that's what I remember from the 82. Not only did all these things happen, the players were just completely unapologetic about it. It was like, we don't owe anybody anything. We don't care what you think about this. It's all about result. You know, if the results are good, that's all that matters. And that was just the part that really stuck with me. And that attitude definitely changed over the years. I feel like there's definitely a different vibe there.
You still see that sometimes, though, like in 2018 versus Sweden, right? At the end of the Sweden game, the only match they won 4 years ago, they just ran right to the Swedish coaching staff and started yelling at the face. And it's like, you don't want to see that. What kind of sportsmanship is that? Sometimes that kind of stuff can shine through. You know, in 2014, how do you feel about 2014, by the way? It seems like that was sort of the perfect summer. Like, you didn't see much of that. It was a cosmopolitan German team of people who were children. Half the team was children of immigrants who came to the country, and they unified and they played well. And it was a very difficult tournament to win with the weather and the fact that travel from an island all the time and all the flying they had to do, and with Jogi Löw, who didn't really have a lot of top management experience. So his the word was still out on Jogi Löw and stuff. It was just, how do you feel about that tournament?
The strange thing about 2014 is that I was already in Berlin not permanently living in Berlin, but I'm now working for El Freunde because to explain this, it's sort of the magazine started out as a fanzine, but it's now become very big. It's sort of like 442. During the summer, we have we do podcasts. During the summer, I say, during a normal summer, when the tournament doesn't happen to be in the wintertime.
Right.
We do podcasts. We do cover everything on our website. We have public screenings. We used to organize 2 or 3 public screenings in Berlin. So that means during the World Cup, we're always insanely busy. So you have readings. We do pub quizzes, whatever. We appear on radio or television. We introduce people to the games, or whatever. All kinds of things have to be done. And there was one day I had off during that 2014 World Cup, and it was the day of the semifinal.
It's a good one.
And I thought, this has been going on for 3 weeks. I've spent almost every day at this World Cup camp watching the games on the large screens. Also because the atmosphere, of course, was very good.
Yeah.
I thought, no, come on, they're gonna lose anyway. So this is my day off. So I'm just going home to my little flat and watch the game on the small computer, a small computer screen. And so basically watch the most amazing World Cup game in history, on a small computer screen. And I was very tired. And there were many moments where I thought, God, am I hallucinating?
Right. It's hard to believe.
It was also because during that World Cup, one of the Berlin things to do was fans had these firecrackers, and Berlin's, they're called Polish crackers because they're illegal in Germany because they're really heavy and really loud and actually quite dangerous, but you can get them in nearby Poland. Sorry. So what happened was that people would throw these firecrackers into the air whenever Germany scored a goal. And in Berlin, a lot of people live in those inner courts, where so, and it gets insanely loud, and they kept doing this for this Brazil game, and they stopped after the 3rd goal.
Right.
And I don't know if they stopped because, it was just they couldn't believe what was happening,
right?
Or if they'd run out of ammunition.
Ran out, right?
Probably
run out of crackers.
Well, three will be plenty for this one.
Yeah.
In your defense, that game was over in 25 minutes, so it wasn't even a 90-minute game, pretty much. By minute 25, I think it was 5-0, and then 50 hits us now. Yeah.
So maybe we'll ask you about this. This is the link now between 2014. What do you think about is Götze going to do it again?
I don't think it's going to the World Cup as a starting player. I'm not sure.
Right, I don't. Probably not.
How do you feel about
He's coming for good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah. How do you feel about your chances overall against Japan and Costa Rica and Spain getting out of the group? Specifically talking about the football now, how are you feeling about Deutschland in general moving in?
I refuse to comment on that because I was just talking about things that we as a magazine do during a tournament.
So you're going to boycott it,
as you can imagine. Sorry, those public screening things. It's not like this huge thing in Berlin. There's actually 1 million people used to watch the games, but it was the biggest one was for I think maybe 1,500 people or whatever.
That's a lot.
But yeah, it's quite big.
Yeah.
It's also because it's in Berlin,
right?
That whenever Germany make it out of the group stage, a politician will he won't call. Well, he's not calling himself, but some secretary is calling us and saying, "Would you mind if so and so comes to the next game and watches, perhaps with the ambassador from Ghana or whatever?" And suddenly you have to take care of security and everything.
Yeah, that's not fun.
Very complicated and expensive. Now, and of course, there's a lot of planning involved in all this because you've got to rent the place and the screens and everything. So, like I said, we do this for every tournament. And at every tournament, there's this moment when somebody says, hang on, guys, what if Germany get eliminated at the group stage? And then everybody looks around for like 10 seconds, and then everybody breaks into laughter. Because of course they won't, you know. They will be in the semifinals and then maybe in the final, so everything will be fine. That was the general attitude until 2018.
I was going to say 2018 happened, right?
And I was at the end of the year. We have a sort of an end of the year poll where every writer is asked to contribute his moment, his football moment of the year. And it's, I don't know, a big game that you saw, or a great goal, or whatever. And I nominated the moment when I was together with an intern. I mean, everybody had gone to this public screening place to watch Germany play South Korea, but somebody had to stay back. So I stayed back, and an intern stayed back. And I remember when you know, there was this moment when South Korea scored. And the goal was chalked off, and then you saw the replay that the ball came from a German player, so he wasn't offside. So it was that moment when, you know, the replay came, and we knew before the referee knew, before the crowd knew, that he would now see that it was a legal goal,
right?
And he would then have to give the goal, and it would mean that Germany were eliminated at the group stage for the first time. In our lifetime, and well, for both of us, it was. I mean, he was a lot younger than I was, but he had grown up with the secure in the knowledge, right, Germany would at least be in the semifinal at whatever tournament you have. So there was a very, very unreal moment, and ever since, it used to be that it was very easy to predict a tournament, because because Germany will reach the quarterfinals, and then it depends on they'll be in the semifinals, but not anymore. So especially not at this World Cup, which is really very, very open. I think there's lots of really, really good teams. So this is hard.
Japan is not too shabby at all. I'm telling you, I think Japan's got themselves quite a squad for this one. So if I had to say, Brazil are certainly strong.
Argentina. And then, exactly. We asked Martin Mazur, a writer from Argentina, to write a piece for this issue. Sorry, about Messi's last World Cup. And reading that piece, boy, makes me think that could be really, really dangerous. Yeah. Because they had this. Martin goes on at length about how Argentina were cursed, never winning anything, how a lot of Argentinian fans that felt Messi was only performing for Barcelona, never for the national team. And all this has suddenly changed. Right. They won the Copa, and ever since. So
he's playing for PSG now, like he's 25. All of a sudden, I think he's got this tournament. He's got this tournament in his crosshairs. I think he's going to have himself a pretty good tournament. He's usually tired by the World Cup because of Barcelona. Those seasons were so long. I remember in 2014, he played despite he was exhausted. You could see him just how exhausted he was. But now it might even serve him that it's halfway through the season with his advanced age. He might have a type of energy he's never had at the World Cup before. So
he can win the World Cup and then reunite with Pep Guardiola at New York City FC. What would be bad?
And the French team, of course, very good, trying to avoid their curse of being eliminated in the first round, which is a common curse. But they also released their squad. Oh, the depths! I mean, Christopher Nkunku isn't going to get any minutes, and he's one of the best strikers in the Bundesliga. They just have so many other forwards instead.
I still think their midfield is going to be a little thin without Pogba and Kante. But paper,
they're missing a bit of steel, a bit of maybe.
Well, Marco Reus, we were saying before, the Marco Reus behind you is missing out again. I mean, we really just talking about cursed. What a sad another close miss. He wasn't quite getting fit for this one.
Yeah. I think he wanted to pull himself out of it at this point. I just don't think he likes World Cups. It's like, I don't think he wants to go to them. So he's like, oh, look, another injury.
And then the one he was in didn't really go all that well.
I'm saying,
exactly. Right.
Well, in 2018, Germans finally learned what it was like to watch the World Cup as an American. We've done okay, but like 2006 in Deutschland, I remember USA also was like, are they going to beat Ghana in that third round? Nope, eliminated. 98, of course, we got last place. And then in 2018, we missed it altogether. So for a German-American fan, 2018 wasn't fun for me. But U.S. team didn't make it, but at least they still had Deutschland. They had the worst World Cup in the modern age, So I'm just hoping for 2022 just be a little bit of a bounce back for both. I want the U.S. to get out of the group, and Hoffnungs Deutschland can maybe make it to the semis, maybe, knock on wood, or something. Who knows? Maybe a surprise win. You never know. Deutschland is a tournament team, I think, as they always call them. There's a lot of new faces, with Klostermann there and Götze and Moukoko and Fuku, which is not usual for a German roster. Usually they're pretty certain with how it's very rare to see that. Usually by the time the World Cup rolls around, the roster is the same roster we've seen for the last 2 years. So the qualifiers. There aren't a lot of surprises. But this year was a little bit of a different story.
It's going to be different.
Yeah. So
personally, my feeling, just my gut feeling, is that the team isn't as good as it thinks it is.
Right.
That's just me. And well,
as they
it's going to be a very, very unusual World Cup anyway. So
yeah,
I think it's basically up for grabs.
I mean, I think, yeah, I agree. I would agree with you. I think defensively, it's been pretty spotty. I think Rüdiger is the solid one, and then whoever else is playing there, we'll see how it goes. Yeah, I was a little sad to not see Robin Gosens on this roster. But I think also that was an injury thing, right? He's having a hard time coming back. He hadn't gotten a lot of starts in Italy, but he to me is like one of those, like the Kevin in the Kevin Grosskreutz sort of category of somebody who's like a bit of a wild card who can.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Flick explained this by saying he hasn't played much,
Yeah.
But Klostermann hasn't played at all, and Thomas Müller hasn't played much lately.
Right.
So, but still, yeah. But maybe you can't have 3 players like that in the squad. I don't know. Then again, it's a huge squad, I mean,
right. They have more.
I was shocked to learn, who still plays professional football? Lukas Podolski. He's never retired. Didn't you? I never realized. I thought he retired like 2 or 3 years ago. I thought he still plays. Bring Podolski. Bring Poldy.
If they're bringing Götze back, why not? Why not Lukas?
Bring Poldy back. Why not?
We had. When did the pandemic struck? I think it was about March
2020.
2020, yeah.
2020. So there was very little football going on for a long time. And the first proper game I saw after the pandemic, I mean, proper means with crowds and everything, was Lukas Podolski's first game for Górnik Zabrze in Poland.
Oh, wow.
Because he's now playing for, more or less for his hometown club.
Right.
And there's, there's really this, it is true that he promised his grandmother he would one day play for Górnik. And, she's dead now, but he's kept his promise. So he's still playing, and he scored a wonder goal a couple of days ago. He scored from more than 50 yards.
I'm telling you, bring him.
Yeah,
right. Bring him.
First. He's the first alternate. Anybody gets hurt, Lukas is coming.
Well,
thank you so much. Yeah,
I asked for 30 minutes of your time, and I could talk to you for another hour at least. We're just so excited. Thanks for giving us your time. And so, in addition to all the great English books and stuff you worked on, your main gig now is Elf Freunde. Yeah? So if you want to find it, go to elffreunde.de, where you can find me a lot. I'm usually over there checking it out. And you have an actual physical print magazine that's available in Deutschland. Yeah. Is it available anywhere outside of Deutschland at all? Do you think?
Well, not at newsstands, as we used to say back when there were newsstands.
Yeah, right.
Anymore, anyway.
Of course you cannot. But of course you can order it. It's in German. Wait, it's in German.
They come, yeah. I'm a subscriber. They ship internationally. Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to find a hard copy magazine World Cup preview here in the United States, and you just can't find any of them. I think Sports Illustrated just yesterday released maybe a new edition. But even 442, it's a month old. I go to the local newsstands to find 442, and it takes them over a month to ship. So the World Cup preview will arrive right when the World Cup ends. so I'm trying to get my hands on a good physical World Cup preview. So maybe I'll import an El Freunde and I'll read that Dark Side of Football article. I can't wait.
Yeah, I haven't. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Uli.
Okay, well, it was
Mr.
my
Hesse.
pleasure.
Really
perhaps
appreciate
another
it.
time.
Yeah.
And whatever happens, right? You know,
Enjoy the World Cup.
On. Enjoy the
too.
World Cup. That was just a Schnitzel Boys video on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. If you like that one, we've got a couple other ones right over here. And if you like that one, don't be afraid to subscribe, like, and ring that bell.
It's the Schnitzel Boys, it's the Schnitzel Boys, it's the Schnitzel Boys.